So, Mike, I was reading this FT piece this week about a 23-year-old or roundabouts buying a dumb phone and what his reflections were after 12 months of using this phone, right?
Okay.
And it made me reflect on my own phone usage. And I checked, never a good thing. I blame this, upstart 23-year-old for making me do that. But I looked at the stats and I'm going to go back to OneSec, the app that helps you it purports to kind of cut your screen time in half. Ooh. And I've used it in the past. It's pretty good. You can set time barriers for use of certain apps. So it's pretty good for stopping you using Instagram if that's your thing or whatever it is. It asks you to add an intervention when you go onto the app. And I thought it'd be a great way to kind of start today's episode of Ctrl-Alt-Speech. What would you add an intervention for?
Oh, now that is a good question. I don't think I'm quite ready to add an intervention yet for this, but in the last few weeks, I've gotten really into Claude Code and have gone super deep in discovering the somewhat scary but impressive power of what Claude Code can do for you, whether it's making apps or just doing stuff for you. And I guess it sort of has a built-in intervention in that it limits how much you can do in 4 hours. And I will sometimes kind of start to max that out while continually reloading the page that tells me how close I am to running out of tokens to do stuff. But I could see me getting to the point where I need an intervention to stop me from using Claude Code.
Yeah.
What about you? What intervention are you adding?
Well, I'm not there yet with using Claude Code, but I am frantically refreshing Blue Sky for January transfers for my football team. And it's got obsessive. I'm like every transfer window, I'm desperate to find out who they've signed, how it's going to help us stay up. So it's too much. I want an intervention for that.
I will say this is the same season in baseball as well, and I've been doing that as well, which is a nice thing that Blue Sky is becoming very much a sports app. So I will mention that as well.
Agreed. There is hope for our sports teams yet, maybe. Hello and welcome to Ctrl-Alt-Speech, your weekly roundup of the major stories about online speech, content moderation, and internet regulation. It's January 22nd, 2026, and this week we're talking about how to make a constitution in 20,000 words, YouTube's safety flex, and why maybe, just maybe, we should start feeling sorry for Pavel Durov. What? My name is Ben Whitelaw. Wait and see. My name is Ben Whitelaw, and I'm the founder and editor of Everything Moderation. I'm joined with Mike Masnick, founder of Techder, and we are not in Davos, Mike.
No.
We are not invited. We are not there. We are
not the elite, Ben. We are the sub-elite. I had posted this to Blue Sky earlier this week. I you know how everybody was sending out year-end notification. This is, everything you did last year, blah, blah, blah. I got an email last week from some hotel property, and I don't even know which one it was. I must have stayed there on some trip. And it said, your stats for 2025. It says, you've been a member for all of 0 years. And in that time, you have reached non-elite status.
How damning.
Yes. I am officially a non-elite, according to some random hotel chain that I probably stayed at once.
Yeah. How do you feel about that?
I feel good. This is an anti-elite era. And so, if I were elite, then maybe I would be at Davos. But as a confirmed via this hotel chain, non-elite, I am not invited and not allowed.
Yeah. I mean, I'm still waiting for my invite. Maybe it'll come next year. I think one thing I would say, we're going to talk a bit about a couple of things that have been discussed and announced at Davos in today's episode. But one thing I think we would be good for at Davos is drumming up sponsorship interest in Ctrl-Alt-Speech. I bet there's a load of people at Davos who would be very up for sponsoring this fair podcast that we painstakingly handcraft each week. What do you think about that? Do you think we should be there selling our wares?
Well, yes, maybe. Because we do have certainly, if we are not elite, Ben, I do feel like we have a lot of elite listeners.
Yeah.
Many of whom I would imagine we have plenty of people who are at Davos who listen to this podcast regularly. Hopefully, as soon as it comes out, first thing, it should go right to the top of your player. But Yes. As we've discussed before, we survive on sponsorship revenue. That allows us to do this. We put a lot of time into everything that we are doing. And we're making another sort of call for sponsorships right now. So if you are listening to this and you happen to work at an organization of any kind that is interested in seeing Ctrl-Alt-Speech continue to be the wonderful thing that it is, we would love to have you on as a sponsor. And again, we feel that our sponsorship setup is one that is unique, but also really beneficial for everybody, including the listeners. We really feel that our form of sponsorship can be a win-win-win, where the most common form is that we get to do some sort of interview with you or someone that you designate. And it can be a very interesting, it has to be an on-topic interview. It is not designed to be super salesy, but rather to let you demonstrate something interesting and powerful and thought-provoking in a way that is interesting to us and interesting to our audience. And I think that is unique and fun, but we always need more sponsors. I know we've done some really great ones already, and we have some more coming up, but we're putting out our plea for sponsorship help. And we may have a unique sponsorship opportunity for people who want it right now. This is a very short-term offer, which is, if you are a regular listener to Ctrl-Alt-Speech, you know that we discussed in our first episode of the year our 2026 bingo card. And one of the things that I did with Claude Code, as I revealed my new addiction.
Other coding tools are available.
Yes.
Claude is not one of the sponsors of this podcast, although it probably should be.
Yeah, we can work on that. But I have built a bingo app, a Ctrl-Alt-Speech bingo app, which we will be putting up on the webpage at some point soon. And we are open to having somebody sponsor that. And so it would be a thing that all the regular listeners of Ctrl-Alt-Speech every week may open it up, or we have a version that you can print out, including sponsorship information. And so if you are a sponsor, you could get your name or some idea in front of all of the listeners of Ctrl-Alt-Speech basically every week that we release a podcast as they play along with our bingo game.
Yeah. You'd be so good on QVC, Mike. That is like the perfect, this is a limited time only offer for a bingo card.
The phones are ringing now.
Get it while it's hot, people. Don't delay. This won't happen until January 2027.
Exactly. There is a short-term offer. We will get this on the site relatively soon, and it would be nice if when we officially announce that it is available on the site, if we already have a sponsor in place. So time is limited. Call now.
Yeah, 0800 bingo card. That's a fake number. I think the point about having really great listeners is also true. I spoke to a bunch of people this week. Somebody from a regulator, one of our favorite regulators, a great, fantastic regulator, as Donald might say. I spoke to somebody at a platform as senior within the trust and safety scheme. I spoke to a lawyer for a firm who works with a bunch of other platforms. We have a really great listenership, and our sponsors will be perfectly situated within our episode to reach those. So, and again, it's what keeps the episodes coming out every week. It's what keeps us able to do the research and be able to record this each and every week. So yeah, if you're interested, get in touch. Podcast at Ctrl-Alt-Speech.com. Get it while you can. Just one thing before we jump into one of the Davos kind of news items today, Mike. Just on that FT piece that I mentioned at the top of today's episode, we'll include it in today's show notes, but did you know that there's a dumb phone called the Sunbeam Juniper?
I had not heard of it. I have seen a few attempts at creating dumb phones or flip phones or whatever, but I had not heard of that particular one.
Yeah, so it's a make I've never heard of. It basically stood out for me because it sounds like a vape flavor.
They know their audience. They're targeting the, Gen Z folks. And so...
Yeah. And it's a really interesting piece. It speaks to a lot of the under 16 social media ban, the kind of anti-smartphone campaigns that we've been chatting about in recent weeks. Worth separately going to have a read of that if you're interested, listeners. But yeah, let's get started on today's news. Obviously, the world's kind of great, good, and some kind of less favorable people are in Switzerland this week. as part of the World Economic Forum's Davos convening. And one of the people who has been there and been talking is Anthropic CEO, Dario Amodei, where he's announced updates to one of its foundational elements, safety elements, which kind of underpins a lot of how Claude prevents users encountering harm. And Mike, you thought this was a really kind of pivotal moment in trust and safety landscape, and you wanted to talk a bit about why.
Yeah, so Anthropic is a really interesting company for a variety of reasons. I think a lot of people sort of consider it the little brother to OpenAI in many ways, and it was sort of a bunch of people who had worked at OpenAI left and went to create Anthropic. And the sense, and some of this is always marketing speak, was like, oh, they're going to build safe AI in a better way. They've talked for years about the idea of constitutional AI and that they are training Claude with a constitution. And they had released something a few years ago that was a couple thousand words, basically, sort of laying out their framework for thinking about things. But what they did this week was they released the new constitution that apparently they've been working on for some time. And it is a massive document. I believe it's like 23,000 words or something like that. I forget the exact count. I saw the announcement and I saw somebody else refer to it as Claude has released its soul to the public. They put it under a CC0 license, effectively putting it in the public domain, basically saying anyone can go use this without permission or without even crediting them if you want. But they put a lot of work into the document. And I started reading it and realized I hadn't gotten very far after a fair bit of time getting through it, and looked at the scroll bar on the side and said, oh, wow, wait, I'm maybe 5% into this document, and realized how long it is. As they say, they created this for Claude itself. It is written for an AI and not a human. Now, I've seen different reactions to this, including some people saying, oh, they're acting as if the AI or the LLM is human, which is something that Anthropic sometimes does, where they sort of blur the line between what an LLM is and what a human is. But what struck me as really interesting about this is that it is one of the most sort of deeply involved documents exploring values around trust and safety and helpfulness. The thing that people in the trust and safety field have talked about for years, right? Like, how do you not just define values, but put them into practice? How do you determine what you are trying to do? How do you deal with the different trade-offs? How do you set all of these things up? But operationalizing that has always been one of the big challenges of trust and safety. And this is an attempt to do that in the AI era. And I think it's sort of, it's a moment worth marking and worth thinking about. The fact that they have written out this novella-sized document of how they think about their values and how they define those values. And even the values themselves struck me as really, really interesting and thought-provoking. I don't know if they're good, but it's thought-provoking because they have sort of these 4 key values that they talk about. And even the way they define them is fascinating because they say broadly safe, broadly ethical, then compliant with Anthropic's guidelines, and then finally genuinely helpful. And so the compliant with Anthropic's guidelines, like that feels like sort of a weird catch-all kind of thing. But the other 3 were like the fact that you say broadly safe, right? Like the typical thing that you would see from most companies is like safe, right? Just you define it and then you have this thing and you sort of set up this idea like we are the safe platform and safety is our main virtue or whatever it is. And then you sort of try and operationalize that. And what everyone in the trust and safety field realizes at some point is like there are trade-offs. And safe for whom, safe for what, safe in what context, safe over what time period. There are all of these different variables that make it very difficult to figure out what do you mean by safe? You can say safe, but how do you operationalize that in a realistic way, dealing with all of the trade-offs? But by starting out by just saying broadly safe, you're sort of opening up this conversation. And then, of course, within the document, you have however many 5,000 words on what do you mean by broadly safe? And what do you mean in a way that a non-human LLM can understand what you mean and make decisions based on the different trade-offs? To me, this is fascinating.
Yeah. And so these 20,000 words, 23,000 words essentially shape all of Claude's outputs, right? So if a user comes to Claude and asks it to generate CSAM or to generate terrorist material, it would essentially look it up against the Constitution and kind of provide a response based on that. That's how it works, right?
Yeah, it is a part of it. There are a number of different things, right? There's the system prompt and there's all the training and all these other things. But yes, this is a part of what defines how Claude works and sort of what kinds of broadly safe features are baked in to the underlying system.
Interesting. I want to talk a bit about how it came to be, because there's probably an interesting story behind that. But it's interesting. I remember in 2023 when they first started talking about the Constitution, that it was basically based on the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights, with a few other kind of things sprinkled in. It had some rules created by Google, some of its own research, which was obviously in its early stages then. Actually, I think had Apple's terms of service kind of looped in as well, but it wasn't a very big or kind of detailed document. How much of that human rights emphasis is still in there from what you've read about it and the bit that you've read?
I mean, I think that is definitely there. I think it is a part of the larger thinking. I mean, I think what has happened over the last few years are a few different things. And one is Anthropic realizing the limitations of what they had written a few years ago and the different challenges and trade-offs inherent in all of these decisions. And so the rewrite of this document was to take the general concepts, the broad concepts that were included in the original document, and try to make them more concrete for an LLM to understand, right? Mm-hmm. Because, and they say this over and over again, the document is human readable. It's absolutely human readable. You can read the whole thing and you could understand it. But you can see elements in there that are from people who have spent a lot of time working with LLMs and realizing where they go wrong. And often where they go wrong is where there's some element of humanness that they miss, right? The extreme versions of it are, it will take something way more literally than it needs to, right? Mm-hmm. And that can create problems and create difficulties. And there are ways to tune that. And you can set the different models to sort of have more creative responses or more strict responses. But this is an attempt to figure out, is there really a way that as these technologies are becoming more and more ingrained in our lives, is there a way to really define values for these non-human entities? Yeah. And with companies, you see things like statements of values, and you have training, and you're training humans and to do things, and you have correctives when things go wrong, and there's a whole sort of process involved. But as LLM models are becoming really integrated in all sorts of ways, some good, some bad. I'm not saying, I'm not one of those people who thinks everything needs to turn into AI, but I do think it is a really powerful tool. And as it is becoming more and more embedded in different ways, there is a bigger question of how do you embed the values? And I think, there are lots of reasonable criticisms of AI. There are some less reasonable criticisms of AI. But I think one of the legitimate reasonable criticisms is, as certain companies are turning over more and more decision-making to these different tools in some form or another, how are they able to actually build in the values? And Anthropic is, in some ways, a step ahead in that they are really trying to think through how they're doing it. And their answer is these 23,000 words. Mm-hmm. And to me, it's just fascinating to see that as this evolution of thinking about trust and safety in an AI era, very different than what we've seen in the past, even if the end goal is somewhat similar. I mean, I don't think they would call this a trust and safety document, but to me, this is very much a trust and safety document.
Yeah. I mean, it's certainly an AI governance initiative, document, whatever you want to call it. And increasingly the lines between trust and safety and kind of AI governance ethics standards are blurring. I want to kind of get into who has had a role in shaping this document. Listeners might be thinking, okay, it's all well and good that you have this document, that it exists. It's a reference point for within the model. But kind of what do we know about the people who've created this document and who's shaped it to date? Do you know?
They do say, and at the very top of the document, they mention the people involved. To be honest, I don't know very much about them. I've met a few people at Anthropic, and they've always struck me as very thoughtful, sometimes overly earnest about how they look at these things. But it does sound like it's a group of people within Anthropic who've been thinking about these things. They have, because of partly the way they've always framed the company, they've always had people whose job it is at Anthropic to sort of think through the different challenges and try to be forward-looking in terms of where might things go wrong and how might we prevent that. I mean, I had a conversation last year with an employee at Anthropic on the ethical issues of whether or not you should ever be able to shut down an AI. And effectively, like, is that the equivalent of killing a living being?
Right, yeah.
Which was, a little bit out there.
Yeah.
But someone's job at Anthropic is to sort of think through these kinds of ethical issues. They have a number of people who spend a lot of time trying to think through values and ethics related to the technology. And it's easy to sort of mock some of that, and plenty of people are. And it's easy to be cynical about that. But compared to the alternative, which is like, we don't care and we're just building stuff and stop making us try and think through consequences, I find this really unique. And there's value in that, even if maybe there are parts of it that are strange or I might not agree with. I'm impressed by the fact that they've shown up as having a corporate value that the technology should not be doing harm. And they're trying to figure out ways to build that in a way that actually works, that it's not just a poster on the wall that you're supposed to look at and make your decisions based on, but that you've actually built it into the systems and technologies that you're building. And, we'll see how it actually works out in practice. But to me, I think this is just a key notable moment in how the concept of technology safety is evolving.
Yeah, really interesting. And it would be particularly interesting if in future iterations of if they allow external parties or external institutions, bodies, experts to input on this as well, right? I'm sure there are elements of it that are informal right now, where the team responsible for it are soliciting ideas for the kind of constitution. But there could be a situation where you kind of actively seek ideas for the constitution in a way of building a kind of more representative document, right, that underpins a model. And that could have both safety benefits, but also benefits in terms of attracting a user base that cares about these things.
Yeah, you could even imagine a world where, like the U.S. Constitution in theory, you can add amendments to it that, you need to get sort of democratic support for, right? So you could see a system like that happening. I also think the fact that they put it in the public domain is interesting because in theory, you could see other models or other systems try and adopt it or modify it to their own needs. And it would be interesting to see if other open source models or whatever try to take this and change it and adjust it and see what kind of results we get from it. It'll be interesting. I mean, I think this is probably so specific to Claude that I'm not sure, but Claude has honestly, such a good reputation among the different LLMs that it wouldn't surprise me if some of the models, or even honestly, some of the open source Chinese models that are coming on the market might try and adopt this just to sort of improve the quality of their systems.
Yeah, it will be interesting to see who picks it up. Let's move on now to someone who is probably at Davos based upon his previous attendance record and the platform that he is chief of, Neil Mohan and YouTube. In previous years, he has been in Davos. He's been talking about YouTube's growth and in some cases its safety credentials as well. But there's been a kind of flurry of really interesting updates that YouTube has been putting out in the last couple of weeks. And a large part of that has come from him, who, he writes this annual letter, which acts as a kind of communication to both creators on the platform, but also viewers, as well as kind of other stakeholders and the media. So you can kind of get into it and understand a bit about where its focus is. I'm really interested in YouTube, Mike, because it's often maligned for its trust and safety practices, as well as getting away with not a lot of coverage for...
I was going to say that second part is the big one, right?
Yeah.
I mean, for all the complaints about every social media platform, people have said, like, YouTube wears a magic cloak that seems to... They get a pass on so much stuff. It's kind of amazing.
Exactly. So the kind of the flurry of announcements and the activity is I think notable. And so last week it put out a blog post saying that it was refining its approach to parental controls, particularly around the way viewers were able to changed how they looked at Shorts. Shorts is their kind of short form video format. It's very, very popular, a bit of a competitor to the Instagram Reels. And it's kind of developed a set of principles where parents can now specify how much Reels content their children can consume on the platform. Interestingly here, they said that one of the principles is that you as a parent can set the limit of Reels content to 0. So, I don't want my child to watch any Reels content whatsoever. They can watch longer form YouTube content. And YouTube believe that this setting to 0 is an industry first, that there is no parental control that means you can set a specific kind of content to 0, which I found fascinating. I was pretty surprised by that. I felt like that should be baked into some of the settings. Anyway, it was a signal, I think, to people that they are making some effort to improve the way that particularly under 16s and children consume content on the platform. Then there was Neil Mohan's letter, which came out a couple of days ago. He has been kind of, this is basically a strategy for 2026 and beyond. And there's a big focus on creators and helping creators monetize their content on the platform. There's a big focus on AI, as you might expect. But sprinkled in, somewhat surprising, there are a couple of safety elements in there too. So one of them is that they want to improve parental controls, which is the blog post that was announced last week. And also that they want to remove what he calls harmful synthetic media that violates YouTube's guidelines. And he kind of details a little bit about how YouTube are using the spam and clickbait systems that they have used to reduce low quality content in the past to then also address AI content. So again, within this kind of big glitzy letter in which he name drops a bunch of creators and explains about how YouTube is going to be the TV of the future and somewhat already is, there are strong safety messages in there as well. Now, I'm going to say, Mike, there are some sort of cynical reasons for this. You could argue that it's about anticipating a regulatory response here and making YouTube seem like the good guy in case anything goes wrong in many of the jurisdictions where it's likely to face heat over the coming years. You could say it's about kind of aligning with the pressure to keep children safe and to avoid endangering children in the way that so many people are caring about. I think it's about cash. I think this is...
You cynic.
I think this is about cash. I say this because Mohan kind of outlines the 3 ways that kind of YouTube is moving towards creators, towards a connected TV future, and towards education play. And now there's 3 areas that are famously incompatible with harmful content. I don't know about you, but trying to get YouTube into education settings or into the living room of your family home without some sort of strong safety guidelines is going to be really, really tough. And so there is clearly a commercial impetus to do this, right? He's not saying explicitly we're doing this because we want to grow, but you can see from the letter that these 2 things are connected. And then if you factor in another kind of announcement this week about the BBC making this bespoke content for the platform, I think this only backs up my point. Big media organizations, particularly public broadcasters like BBC, are not going to start creating content that they only put on YouTube or that they first put on YouTube before putting on their own platforms if they can be assured that they're not going to appear next to some sort of terrorist video or beheading like there was in the mid-2010s. They're going to need to have strong reassurances that when they're directing people to watch content on YouTube, those people are not going to be recommended content that they shouldn't be watching or that's going to cause them harm. So I think all of these kind of signals together point to 2 things. I think YouTube is probably taking safety a bit more seriously than maybe we think or maybe we give them credit for. Whether or not they're doing that right is another question. But also the kind of commercial impetus of trust and safety. There are business reasons, good business reasons to care about safety measures. And clearly Neil Mohan has realized that.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've tried to make this argument for years, is that trust and safety, having a trustworthy and safe platform is a good business decision. And anyone who thinks of it as a cost center is really missing the big picture, because you will drive people away. And I think I would say YouTube has actually recognized that for quite some time. And there have been different studies. There were all of the sort of early reports when the recommendation algorithm on YouTube was first becoming very popular about how it was driving people towards potentially extremist content or whatnot. And YouTube actually appeared to take that fairly seriously. And there have been multiple studies I think going back about 6 or 7 years, showing that these days it's almost impossible to get YouTube to sort of push you down a dangerous rabbit hole unless you start in a dangerous spot. And so a few of the studies basically said, yes, if you are driven to certain YouTube videos via outside sources, so some Substack, someone on X pointing you to things, like it might start taking you to similar kinds of videos. But if you just go to YouTube straight and watch some videos, it tends to push you more towards the commercial, happy, good videos. And he mentions somewhere in this the thing that is, I think, totally true or becoming true or already became true, which is that YouTube is TV today. And unlike traditional TV, where there was giant gatekeepers involved, you have the television studios, which would pick the few shows that they would allow each year, and there would be millions of dollars in production that goes into it. The incredible thing about YouTube is that it effectively has a minor leagues and a professional space that they can play together. And if you're very good at your content, you can move up in the world. And it's a great thing for YouTube itself because they don't have to go through the risk and capital expenditure of a TV studio to figure out what to invest in. You can just sort of see naturally who's building an audience, and the tools are getting cheaper and cheaper in terms of good cameras, good microphones, good lighting. The ability to make professional level content has really democratized in all sorts of ways. And so I think he's realizing or realized that a while ago, but is expressing it here, that if you want to have a really successful platform that continues to grow, you need really good professional content and you need people to feel safe on that platform. And that's people of all ages. I mean, I think one of the things that comes through in all this is he talks a lot about the appropriate kinds of content for all different ages and all different kinds of people, that you can sort of find the niche that works for you and build from there. And then that includes this idea of like not removing necessarily, but limiting the appeal and the recommendations of content that takes you away from that. So they talk about AI slop. He literally calls it AI slop, and the clickbait and other things. And sort of, there is a real focus on trying to build out the platform as a place that people feel comfortable going. You can question whether or not, how well does it actually work in practice? And of course, with however many billions of users they have, sometimes it fails and sometimes it doesn't quite work right. But I think it is, as you said, it is this clear recognition of there is a business case, a strong business case for having a trustworthy and safe platform.
What do you think this shift towards more professionalized creators, what impact does that have on trust and safety on the platform? Because in TV, you have editorialized practices, you have a fairly kind of homogenous set of ways of doing things, and you have a very centralized way of deciding what gets shown. You don't have that in YouTube. And so you have all of these creators, you can kind of go and follow and subscribe to as many creators as you want. Each of them will have very different approaches to not only content, but the way that they address comments and the way that they manage their own corner of YouTube. Is that a kind of part of the trust and safety ecosystem that we haven't really contended with yet, is how the creators think about these questions?
Maybe, but I'm not sure. I mean, it's funny, he addresses in the letter, the days of considering YouTube to be a user-generated content platform are over. You have these professional content creators who are part of the platform. And I think, it does matter to them, right? Content creators are always concerned about what kinds of content they're near and what else is showing up and what kinds of users. And you always have questions about the comments and all of that kind of stuff. I think all of that applies, but it doesn't strike me as all that different than the trust and safety questions from before. You do have elements of the brand safety questions become a little bit bigger rather than, brand safety is always a part of trust and safety, but it becomes a larger element in terms of like which parts of the trust and safety ecosystem are you looking at, making sure that someone who's built up a huge, valuable brand doesn't have that undermined by problematic content appearing next to them or something along those lines. But it strikes me as part of the continuum.
Yeah. I just wonder if there's the potential for a replica of the Meta system. There was a VIP content moderation system, right, that came out in some of Jeff Horowitz's reporting for the Wall Street Journal 5 or 6 years ago. And, celebrities and sports people and global superstars and probably some creators with large Facebook page followings got special treatment, in some cases being allowed to kind of overturn content decisions and being able to kind of have access to policy people.
This is the famous X-check system. Yeah.
X-check, exactly. There is a risk of something similar happening if it doesn't already happen again.
Yeah, I am maybe. I mean, I think the X-check system was basically Facebook was overwhelmed, and this was a kludgy solution. Like, we need to duct tape something to deal with the fact that I think it even started because like the Barack Obama page got blocked for violating policy, but it wasn't really violating policy. It was basically like there are some accounts where like a human should review it rather than automated systems automatically making the decision. And they just sort of duct tape that on. To some extent, I actually think that the YouTube trust and safety setup may be a little bit more professional, a little bit more organized, that they have better systems in place. A lot of the bigger accounts, perhaps all the bigger accounts, I don't know what the thresholds are, but they often have YouTube representatives. So it's not just like the sort of typical trust and safety setup is the user's sort of blind to it. It happens behind the scenes. Nobody knows who the trust and safety people are. With YouTube, any larger account has a representative that they can reach out to and talk to. So there's more of a relationship building there. And maybe that is something that is different that has come up from the more professionalized content, is the ability to like actually work on partnerships and relationship building. And, when you hit certain numbers, they send you like physical Lucite awards and everything. So, it is different to some extent. I don't necessarily think we'd see like an X-check thing, just in part because I feel like YouTube is maybe a little bit more competent.
Famous last words.
Yeah, I know. I know. That's going to come back to haunt me.
Somebody clip it. That's a really good segue onto, I think, the first of a couple of quick stories that we'll talk through to round up today's episode, Mike.
Yeah.
People with influence contacting people within platforms and trying to kind of move the needle on content that they don't like is all about Rand Paul this week.
Yeah. I mean, this is crazy. Rand Paul, U.S. Senator from Kentucky, historically, he's actually been pretty good on internet policy. And in particular, he's been one of the few remaining senators who has been a strong supporter of Section 230 and the value of Section 230 and putting liability in the right place. We found out this week that was all a facade. He wrote this long, whiny article in the New York Post, basically saying he's completely changed his mind on Section 230 and he was wrong and he didn't realize the implications. And why? Because there was a video on YouTube claiming that he had taken money from Nicolas Maduro, the kidnapped former president of Venezuela, I guess. And that is apparently false, and I believe that it is false and defamatory. And Rand Paul reached out to Google and demanded that they take down this video, and they said, no, we're not the arbiters of truth. We're not going to determine whether or not something is true or false. And he completely lost his shit. Basically. And he did legally threaten the person who uploaded the video, and they took it down, which is exactly how the system is supposed to work. And I found it unique for a variety of reasons. One, this idea that like, oh, you have all these principles and then suddenly there's a video about you and you flip your principles. That means you didn't have principles in the first place. Also, Rand Paul had introduced a bill that did not pass a few years ago about jawboning, which would have made it completely illegal for any government official to speak to any platform about removing any content, which is exactly what he did. And there are all sorts of things. And I wrote an article about this, sort of like picking apart all the different pieces of how incredibly unprincipled and hypocritical Rand Paul is in this. But I think it's actually a really bad sign for Section 230 as well. This idea that one of its remaining supporters in the Senate is like, oh no, somebody said something mean about me on the internet. I'm going to now shut down the open internet. It's a very frustrating thing. I would guess that it has to do with different people working in Rand Paul's office. A lot of these things are driven by staffers, not the senators themselves. And I do know that one of the strongest Section 230 supporters who worked in his office no longer works there. And suddenly this comes out of it. So that sucks. I'm disappointed in him. I mean, I've long been disappointed in Rand Paul for a variety of reasons, but here's one more reason.
We had on our bingo card politician demands magic automated system. We didn't have politician demands video of them to be taken down. Maybe we should add that too.
That's a possibility. Absolutely.
If you have ideas, listeners, for the bingo card, reminder to get in touch with us, Blue Sky, LinkedIn, or podcast@Ctrl-Alt-Speech.com. Interesting. So a bit of hypocrisy there. I want to shine a light on a story in the Moscow Times, Mike, which is not often a media source that we include on Ctrl-Alt-Speech, but it's interesting to note that the Russian kind of regulator, Commodore, I think it's probably pronounced very badly.
I was going to say it's way better than I would have done. So.
Tell us if I'm wrong. There have been reports about the regulator threatening Telegram about some of its content moderation decisions and potentially throttling the app. And users have reported the fact that they have struggled to get messages and the kind of app has been very slow. This is me. I've never thought I'd say this, but I feel sorry for Telegram, Mike, in all honesty. This is the kind of story of like an app that has basically become too close to a state and who's tried to kind of thread the line between being principled in its content moderation decisions. And I wouldn't agree with those content moderation decisions, but it's long said that it would not have kind of established trust and safety processes in place. That was why its CEO, Pavel Durov, was apprehended in France last year in a long-running saga that we talked about. But it has also tried to kind of tread that line in a sense of being used globally, but with a strong emphasis in Russia. So it's used by Russian state officials. It's used by kind of activists there. It's used by people who are, sharing kind of Russian propaganda. It has lots of very large channels on there related to the Russia-Ukraine war. And
I will note really quickly, it's a little bit crazy because Pavel Durov was the founder of VK, which was sort of like the Facebook clone in Russia. And he fled because the Russians were demanding things of him that he didn't want to do. And so he left Russia and basically got rid of VK and handed it off to somebody else and then started Telegram outside of Russia. So it always struck me as weird how much Russia has embraced Telegram since he had been on the outs, it appeared. But maybe, who knows?
Yeah. And it seems like they have kind of maintained that interest, I guess, with the view to controlling, in effect, Telegram, right? They have said that they haven't affected the app. They haven't kind of reduced speeds. But it seems like that is the case according to these reports. And basically, for all Telegram's leaning between trying to be principled in its content moderation decisions and establish a global user base, it's ended up being a slow, almost unusable app, according to users in this report. So I feel a bit sorry, basically. This is, I never thought I'd say that. And I don't condone some of the content on the app. But
I wonder if there's more stuff going on here. I don't know if I trust the reporting on this, but it feels like something is happening, but Russia is now denying that they're trying to throttle it. It'll be interesting. I think this will be an interesting story to follow.
Yeah. And let's round up then, Mike, with your last story, which is a story which is, I think at the end of today's podcast, because it is a bit of a joke. It's a bit of a,
we'll see.
I thought this was an April Fool's when I read it.
Yeah. This announcement at Davos of a new microblogging platform called W, not X, it's W. We'll see. So it was announced, and it's a former eBay executive who was there for over a decade, worked on privacy-related things. It feels, and I've heard from multiple people that this is like the most Davos-brained approach to social media. They announced it like, oh, we need a new platform. And it's the same thing that we've heard with like new Twitter and like all of these, everyone who comes up with this idea is just like, we're going to do it better because we have integrity, as if nobody thought of that before. And there was a strangeness to the original announcement in that they said a new platform. And I am famously in favor of protocols instead of platforms. So I was a little bit like, oh, come on, we don't need a new silo. It has since come out that they are most likely potentially using @protocol, and they have a staging site that is effectively a wrapped version of Blue Sky. And so I'm all for experimentation. And if they want to experiment on a protocol, and it doesn't have to be @protocol, it could be ActivityPub or whatever else, I'm happy to see that kind of experimentation. They also talked a lot about like every user is going to be verified. Every user is going to have to upload an ID. And that kind of stuff I think is very problematic and makes you a target and a risk. And I'm not sure that people are actually really going to embrace this. But it's an experiment. It strikes me as one that probably won't work, but I do actually appreciate the fact that they're trying to do it on an open social system.
Yeah. And explain to listeners why it's called W.
I mean, they've come up with a few different reasons, but like one is to make fun of X, but then also the W split into two Vs, which was like verification and values. And I'm not even gonna. And there was also, what was the last one? There was like, it was for like I can't even remember what the third reason was. They had all these reasons. They also like launched it with like a Star Wars scroll in like 1990s rock music. It was very out of touch with the youth of today, I would say. So we'll see what happens with it. I think it'll be an interesting experiment. Apparently they're well funded, so we'll see what that means.
Okay. Maybe well funded enough to sponsor an episode of Ctrl-Alt-Speech.
There we go. We're always open to that.
However silly your idea. No, that's not true. Mike, that rounds us up neatly for today's episode. Thanks very much for giving us your fun and unfiltered opinion on this week's news. Thanks everyone for listening. It's been great to have you. And thanks to all the outlets that we've featured this week. Go and subscribe, go and read them. We couldn't do without them. And thanks very much for listening this week. We'll see you soon.
Thanks for listening to Ctrl-Alt-Speech. Subscribe now to get our weekly episodes as soon as they're released. If your company or organization is interested in sponsoring the podcast, contact us by visiting Ctrl-Alt-Speech.com. That's Ctrl-Alt-Speech.com.